Every city has its unseen corners. Places that only the persistent ever learn to notice. In Portland, one of them is a small studio. It's tucked between artist lofts in East Burnside, where graffiti covers the brick walls. The espresso there is served in mismatched ceramic mugs. On the third floor of what used to be a printing factory. Elara Wren sat cross-legged on cold concrete. She was surrounded by charcoal sketches and flickering screens. Each screen pinged with messages from 3 different time zones. Morning light filtered through aging window panes. It cast soft angles across her face. Her loose black hair was tied back. Her amber eyes were half shielded behind thin metal frames. One hand cradled a stylus. The other gently turned a chipped coffee mug. She wore a coarse canvas jacket. Her sleeves were rolled up, revealing ink stains smudged across her arms. They were a quiet testimony. She didn't make art for the trend. She made it because not creating felt like not breathing. On the table lay a thick ivory envelope, embossed in silver foil. The title, printed in elegant italics, read, Lakeside Distinguished Entrepreneur Recognition Ceremony. Recipient, Elara Wren. Sent by the Lakeside Development Council. It was from the very town she had left behind 10 years ago. She hadn't looked back once. She had read the letter 17 times. Not because it surprised her, but because it didn't, and somehow, that stung more. This was the same town that once called her, the lost one. The town that praised her sister as the only pride of the Wren family. And now, it wanted to welcome her back, to honor her? Elara let out a quiet laugh. Not of satisfaction, but of disbelief. Her family had no idea who Elara Wren had become. The girl they once scolded for dropping finance to chase paint and daydreams was now the founder of Hidden Branch, a visual storytelling studio with offices in 5 countries. A company behind breakthrough campaigns for 3 global brands. She had never told them. Because she had chosen silence. Because, deep down, Elara still hadn't forgiven them. And perhaps, she hadn't yet forgiven herself either. The door opened softly. Soren stepped in, assistant, partner, and the only person who knew the truth behind the legal alias, Phoenix, on every official document tied to the company. He set a warm bag of pastries on the table. Then he glanced at the still open envelope. You haven't decided yet? Elara didn't answer right away. She lifted her cup, took a slow sip, then said, It's been 10 years. Maybe it's time they knew who I really am. Soren raised an eyebrow. And if they don't recognize you? Elara smiled. A quiet, leaf in autumn smile. Then so be it. I'm not going back for their recognition. I'm going back to prove one thing. Even a hidden branch has roots. Whether they see them or not. The memory didn't come like a flood. It dripped, cold and persistent, like rainwater leaking through a cracked eave. Elara remembered that evening vividly. The dining room was dark mahogany. A crystal chandelier glowed too brightly. Dinner was interrupted by a truth no one at the table wanted to hear. I submitted my application to the Portland School of Visual Arts, she said. She clutched the silk napkin in her lap. Visual communication and applied design. I got in. Silence followed. Not the kind laced with shock. The kind that felt like stone. As if someone had just confessed treason. Her father, Leonard Wren, set down his fork. The clink of metal against porcelain echoed like a sentence passed. He didn't look at her. He stared straight into his wine glass. His voice was level and cold, granite hard. We spent a lifetime building a name of respect. And you choose to become an artist. Elara tried to speak, but nothing came out. Her mother, Jillian, rose slowly. She laid her napkin across her lap with perfect composure. As if confronting something distasteful. Something unclean. No one in this family has ever lived off feelings and watercolors. She said coolly, You think you'll live in some attic studio, covered in paint, calling that a career? Then came Camille's laugh. Short, sharp, dipped in ice. Seriously, Elle? This family funds 3 scholarships to Wharton and Yale every year. And you pick drawing? Elara lifted her chin. She met her sister's gaze. Camille was dressed in a tailored suit. Her hair was pulled into a flawless chignon. She was the future heiress of Wren and Partners. The model daughter. I didn't choose drawing, Elara said quietly. I chose to create something that changes the way people see the world. Camille tilted her head. She smirked. Sounds like an ad for a box of crayons. Elara stood. The chair scraped loudly against the polished hardwood floor. I don't need a finance degree to understand value, she said, but my values are different from yours. In that moment, she knew. The door had closed. No one walked her upstairs. No one asked about tuition. No one spoke of her decision again. The next morning, the Wren family scholarship account linked to her name was drained. There was only one message. You choose your path. You pay for it. Elara left home on an autumn morning. The sun was still lazy, curled behind a veil of pale fog. No tears. No farewell hug from her mother. No last glance from her father or sister. She carried a battered suitcase. Inside were a few sets of clothes, a chipped tablet, and a folder of documents. It held scholarship drafts, a recommendation letter from her high school art teacher, and her acceptance letter from the Portland School of Visual Arts. She rented a small room in a worn-down house. It was 15 minutes' walk from campus. The ceiling was low. The walls were sometimes damp. But the window looked out over a street lined with red-tipped maples. Her first month's rent came from what was left of her summer internship wages. She had earned it by assisting a children's book illustrator. That was the first person who had ever called Elara a storyteller of light and space. From that day on, every coin was measured in hours and patience. She worked 2 jobs. In the morning, she served at a vintage cafe. In the evening, she cleaned a local gallery. At the gallery, she quietly studied how lighting was arranged and how pieces were hung. She also stole moments to read old books on spatial perspective in the backroom archive. By day, she was a freshman. She struggled through color theory, rendering software, and live drawing assignments. Her fingers blistered from the effort. By night, she attended free certification classes on digital media strategy. The program was run by a local startup. She was the oldest student in the room. She was 19. No parties. No college years, like the ones her peers romanticized. Instead, Elara kept a sky-blue notebook. In it, she recorded every idea. She sketched logos between coffee refills. She drew conceptual blueprints for an augmented reality visual interface. On the first page, in all caps, were 4 words: I will not disappear. She had made that promise to herself. In her second year, Elara won a departmental scholarship. It was awarded for academic excellence and for a project proposal. Her proposal was an interactive graphic novel app for autistic children. She built it using a second-hand laptop and open-source tools. By her third year, she met Soren Vale. It was at a student exhibition. He was the only visitor who paused in front of her immersive installation. He didn't ask, "So, what does it mean?" Instead, he simply said, "It felt like walking through a memory that wasn't mine, but somehow still familiar." That one sentence became the first time Elara felt seen and understood. She didn't look back. She didn't write home. She didn't call. Lakeson still saw her as a blot of misplaced color on the Wren family canvas. But in Portland, where wild ideas were seated inside converted warehouses, Elara began growing her own branch. Hidden branch. A quiet thing. But not for long. Someday, even those who had severed her roots would have to look up. The idea came to her on a rainy night. Most important things in Elara's life tended to arrive that way. She was sitting alone in the auxiliary gallery at the Portland Institute of Art. She volunteered there 3 evenings a week in exchange for academic credit. On the walls hung a series of digital artworks paired with motion sensors. When viewers entered the space, the lights shifted. The images responded to their breathing or heartbeat, captured by wireless biometrics. It wasn't Elara's first encounter with interactive art, but it was the first time she felt it with her entire body. A child walked in. He was maybe 8 years old and holding his mother's hand. He hesitated at the threshold. His eyes were wide. He looked unsure in the dim space, where lights flickered like a forest of fireflies. "You can go in," his mother whispered. "Just take a step." He did, and in that instant, the artwork shattered into 1,000 points of light. They spiraled around him. They unfolded into a radiant galaxy. The boy's eyes lit up. It was as if nothing so beautiful had ever happened to him before. I'm the center of the painting. He breathed. Elara didn't move. It wasn't the technology. It wasn't the effect. It was how, in that moment, a child saw himself reflected in the world of art. That night, back in her leaky little apartment, she opened her laptop. She typed a single sentence onto a blank screen. Where art, emotion, and technology intersect, that's where the story begins. She didn't know where it would lead. But she knew exactly what she wanted to build. She wanted a platform. One where brands, artists, and users didn't just see something. They could feel what they were engaging with. Not ads, not templated content, but stories that could be experienced with every sense. Not long after, she told Soren. It was during a late-night break. They were both assisting in a first-year communication design course. Soren listened quietly. Then he paused. Sounds like a hidden forest. No neon, no noise, but alive enough to outlast winter. Elara looked at him. Hidden branch. What? She smiled. The name of our company. From a rainy night and one sentence from an 8-year-old. Hidden branch took root. It didn't begin in an investment pitch deck. It started in the hearts of two people. They believed emotion was the only language that truly crossed borders. 10 months later, it officially came to life. There was no splashy launch. No headlines. But it grew deep enough to form roots. The very first project Elara and Soren took on was for a tiny independent herbal tea shop. It was called Fern and Fire and sat quietly between two second-hand bookstores on Hawthorne Street. The owner was a middle-aged Irish woman named Maeve. She brewed tea like she was conjuring an old-world ritual. Maeve had no budget. She had only one simple request. I don't need more customers. I just want people to remember what it felt like, holding that first cup of tea. Elara and Soren agreed. They knew full well it would be unpaid. But what Maeve described felt eerily close to what they themselves were chasing. The idea began one night. They were sitting among piles of dried tea petals and scattered pencil sketches. Elara had a thought. If emotion is the thing people carry the longest, then why not turn each cup of tea into a gateway for feeling? They created a sensory experience. There were no VR headsets. No complex apps. Just light, sound, and a single piece of thermosensitive paper. When guests entered Fern and Fire, they were asked to choose a tea based on emotion. Stillness, memory, new beginnings, healing. Depending on the choice, the room's soft lighting would shift. It changed from golden amber, like late afternoon, to cool greens, like an early pine forest. Each table had hidden micro speakers. They played ambient soundscapes, raindrops on rooftops, forest birdsong, folk melodies dissolving into wind. The tea was served on handcrafted heat-sensitive paper. As the warmth spread from the cup, delicate patterns bloomed. It looked like invisible ink awakening. The paper revealed gentle phrases meant to stir memory or meaning. Every deep sleep begins with letting go. You've come so far to arrive at peace. There was no logo, no outdoor ads, just the experience. And yet, people began to return. A writer came every week to draft a novel. A couple celebrated their anniversary there for 3 months straight. A 76-year-old woman wept when her coaster revealed. It's not late. It's just that this time, you're not in a rush. The first online post came from a food blogger. I thought I came here for tea. But Fern and Fire felt like it had been storing my memories from a past life. 2 weeks later, a local arts magazine published a feature. The title read, Hidden Branch, a small studio telling stories that let you feel seen. Late one evening, after sweeping up fallen petals from the weekend event, Soren turned to Elara. You know, he said, I think the first leaf has grown. Elara said nothing. She simply nodded. In her mind, a quiet thought whispered, someday, they'll see the whole forest. 3 months after the Fern and Fire project, the inbox at Hidden Branch remained quiet. Most messages were scattered collaboration requests or invites to local pop-up art fairs. Until one Tuesday morning, Soren had just opened the studio door. He was still holding his coffee when he saw Elara standing motionless in front of the screen. She didn't speak. She simply pointed at the subject line of a newly arrived email. From Mira Caswell, Director of Brand Vision. Solvina Europe. Subject: Confidential Campaign Proposal. The Awakening. Soren nearly dropped his coffee. This is the Solvina I'm thinking of, right? Elara nodded slowly. Her eyes stayed fixed on the screen. Solvina was an eco-luxury fashion brand. It was present in over 30 countries. It was widely known as a global icon, where technology, design philosophy, and post-minimalist aesthetics converged. Their campaigns were typically handled by renowned studios in Tokyo, Stockholm, or New York, never by two young creatives working out of a loft in Portland. Elara opened the email. The tone was formal, elegant, precise. We recently came across your project for Fern and Fire. We believe Hidden Branch brings a unique approach to visual storytelling, not aimed at the eye, but moving through deeper layers of emotional resonance. They wanted Hidden Branch to craft the launch experience for their new line, The Awakening. It was a collection inspired by fragments of memory. The materials were regenerated from natural remnants. Their goal was to usher viewers into a state of deep emotional communion. Not just product interest. Elara exhaled, softly, as if steadying herself against a world that might collapse under the weight of this moment. At the bottom of the message was a quiet invitation to Stockholm. They had 2 weeks to present their initial concept proposal. We don't have the people. We don't have a studio-grade editing room. We don't even have decent AR gear. Soren was listing off limitations. His eyes stayed glued to the hastily drawn-up budget on an A3 sheet. Elara sat cross-legged on the studio floor. She was surrounded by watercolor swatches, torn fabric, and paper scraps. It looked like a quiet storm of visual research. At her fingertips was a strip of deep indigo cotton. She had bought it at a village market 2 years ago. She smiled. But we have something they can't simulate in CGI. Soren looked up. What's that? She met his gaze. A heart that remembers how to listen. In 2 weeks, the studio turned into a living beehive. They mobilized everything they could. They brought in former classmates from their first-year design course. An indie photographer joined. So did a colorblind coder who could build sound-reactive interfaces in under 2 hours. Together, they created a full prototype experience. When customers tried on the garments, ambient lighting shifted with their breath. Fragmented memory visuals, streams, open windows, post-rain fields, appeared slowly on mirrored displays. Gentle, echoing sound cues played in sync. Wearing the pieces didn't just mean wearing fashion. It meant activating a dormant emotional state. They called it memory surface. Solvina called it a brush with the near future. 1 month later, the contract was signed. 7 figures. But what stunned Elara most was the final line in the confirmation letter. And if convenient, we would be honored to have Ms. Elara attend the Global Creative Futures Forum in Geneva. As the representative face of the new American design wave, she closed her laptop. The room was quiet now. No smell of paint, no ticking mice. Then Soren stepped in. He was holding an envelope. It was hand-delivered. The postmark read, Lakesand. You got something. Elara looked at the creamy paper. It was embossed in silver. Lakesand Town Council. Centennial Celebration. Honoring entrepreneurs of Lakesand heritage. Honoree. Elara Wren. Guest of honor. Hidden Branch Studios. Elara sat alone in the studio. Soren had already left. The last light of day slipped through bamboo blinds. It cast pale golden lines across the concrete floor. The envelope from Lakesand remained sealed on the desk. But she already knew what was inside. The letter didn't make her heart tighten. Not anymore. It only stirred a slow, muted ache. It felt like the distant echo of a canyon long abandoned. 10 years. Long enough to grow an entire forest. Long enough to forget her father's scolding. Long enough to forget her mother's cold glances. Long enough to forget Camille's sharp-edged laughter. And yet, one slip of paper. One invitation inked in silver. And the past exhaled again, quiet but undeniable. Like the scent of tea in morning fog. She poured herself a cup of herbal tea. Peppermint and fennel. Then she reached for her old notebook. The sky blue one that had followed her since the day she left home. On the first page, the same 4 words remained. They were written in black ink. I will not disappear. She had written it in a damp room. She sat on a wobbly bunk bed. Her knees were drawn to her chest. A flickering desk lamp lit the words. And she had kept that promise. She hadn't disappeared. She had taken root. She hadn't shouted. She had let the work bloom on its own. So now, what was there to fear? The next morning, she found Soren. He was assembling a new projection map for a beauty campaign. He looked up. Steam curled from the coffee in his hands. There was a mischievous glint behind his round glasses. So, he asked, Elara Wren is going back to Lakesend. She said. She spoke slowly, as if tasting each word. Under the lights. On the stage. In a charcoal gray suit. And with a smile that doesn't need applause. You sure? As sure as the day you told me T could tell stories. Soren laughed. Then I'll book the ticket. But this time, you're not going back to prove you were right. Elara raised an eyebrow. I'm not? He shook his head. His voice was softer now. You're going back to show them. They no longer get to define who you are. 3 days later, Elara packed a few minimalist outfits. She placed them in a silver suitcase. She didn't bring much. No need to look extravagant. No need to hide behind another name. For the first time in a decade, Elara Wren would return to the town that once erased her. She would walk in under the very name they had tried to bury. The train from Portland to Lakesend rolled through golden fall fields. It passed blazing red maple groves. It crossed pockets of memory folded neatly into forgotten corners. Elara leaned her head against the windowpane. No trembling. No regret. Just one thought. It rang clear in her mind, like a church bell that once chimed through quiet mornings. I didn't become someone just to make them regret. I became myself, so I'd never regret living any other way. The afternoon before the awards ceremony. The Wren household buzzed with activity. It felt like they were preparing for a royal gala. Gillian, once the public face of the Lakesend Cultural Development Fund, stood before her mirror. She adjusted her emerald dress. Then she turned to her husband. I heard this year's honoree is an entrepreneur in the creative field. Strange, isn't it? For years it's always been bankers or real estate moguls. Leonard Wren had retired from his role at Wren & Partners. But he still carried a commanding presence. He lowered his magazine and furrowed his brow. Supposedly they're young. Stranger still. They grew up here in Lakesend. And somehow we've never heard of them. Camille chimed in as she descended the stairs. She held her phone in one hand. Her lips were painted a soft red. Lakesend's not big enough to produce a successful entrepreneur. We've never met. Unless, of course, it's the kind of success you get from art or design. Her voice was laced with doubt. It carried a touch of disdain. Have you heard the name? Gillian asked. Just that the brand has Wren in it, Camille said. She narrowed her eyes. Hidden branch. That's the part that makes me uneasy. The room fell silent for a moment. Leonard grunted. It's just a coincidence. Hopefully, Camille replied. But her gaze lingered. It hovered over a suspicion she couldn't quite name. Across town, Elara stood before the mirror in her hotel room. The room was modest and sat near the edge of Lakesend. It was quiet enough to stay unnoticed. It was close enough to walk to the town hall. She wore a simple black suit. It was tailored and sharp. The neckline was square. There were no brand labels and no embellishments. No heels. Just the soft leather boots that had followed her across countless creative stages. On the desk lay the event invitation. Inspiration Entrepreneur of the Year. Elara Wren, founder of Hidden Branch Studios. No calls. No messages. No warnings. Tonight, they would see her. Not the Elara of the past. But the one who had been forged by the very cuts they left behind. As the auditorium began to fill, the Wren family took their seats. They sat in the reserved section at the front of the stage. They were still a household name in Lakesend. Though now, it was mostly in the past tense. Camille sat in the middle. Her eyes scanned the room. Her brows were slightly drawn. This person, Seems to be hiding their identity till the very last second. Probably some marketing stunt, Jillian said with a polite scoff. Young people love drama these days. The sound of the microphone cut through the hum of the crowd. Everyone fell quiet. The host walked onto the stage. The spotlight caught the silver mic on the wooden podium. Ladies and gentlemen, we are gathered here tonight to honor a remarkable individual. Someone who has turned the art of storytelling into a force with global reach. With campaigns echoing across continents and an unbreakable creative spirit. Please welcome the Inspiration Entrepreneur of the Year. A child of Lakeside we once overlooked. But she has not forgotten us. Please welcome Elara Wren, founder of Hidden Branch Studios. It was as if the entire room forgot how to breathe. Jillian froze. Her hand gripped her pearl necklace like a lifeline. Leonard leaned forward, his face turned pale and rigid. Camille stood still, her lips parted. It was as though her body hadn't yet caught up with her mind. From behind the curtain, Elara stepped out. No dazzling smile, no exaggerated bow, just steady steps. Her eyes were deep and calm, like a lake after a storm. She stood beneath the lights. She stood in the silence. She wasn't just facing hundreds of strangers. She was facing those who once called her an embarrassment to the family name. Elara stood on the wooden stage of the Lakeside Town Hall. Warm golden light fell over the shoulders of her charcoal gray suit. It looked like a layer of dust from time itself. In the crowd below were hundreds of unfamiliar faces. But in the front row, 3 familiar ones had already begun to turn to stone. Her father, her mother, and Camille. She held the microphone. She inhaled slowly, not for courage, but to keep her voice steady. Her heartbeat no longer trembled. Good evening, everyone, Elara began. Her voice was low and sure. Thank you for being here. And thank you to this town. The place where I grew up with more questions than answers. A few chuckles scattered across the audience. But mostly, the room remained still. I left Lakeside 10 years ago. I had a worn suitcase, a blue notebook, and a fracture in my chest I couldn't name. I didn't know where I was going. I only knew I couldn't stay. I couldn't remain in a place where people defined me by everything I didn't want to be. She paused. Her gaze fell on the front row. Camille stared straight ahead. Her lips were tight. Jillian tilted her head. Her expression looked clouded. Leonard sat rigid, unmoving. I chose art. And for that choice, I was once called ungrateful, frivolous, lost. But what I've learned is this. You don't need to be believed in to build something meaningful. You just need to believe in yourself long enough. Long enough not to break before the storm passes. Her voice wasn't sharp. It was soft. It was certain, like water carving its way through stone. Hidden Branch wasn't born to rebel. It was born to endure. Like those unseen branches in a forest. Still photosynthesizing. Still growing. Even when the light never reaches them. The silence in the room shifted. It was no longer curious. No longer skeptical. It became something closer to recognition. I'm not here to say I've succeeded, she said. I'm here to say that if anyone ever told you that you weren't enough, not practical enough, not worthy enough, they might have been wrong. Not because you need them to admit it, but because the truth eventually speaks for itself. She looked out again. This time, her voice softened, almost warm. And sometimes, you don't need revenge. You just need to become. The first applause came from the back. Then a group of students joined in. Then a middle-aged entrepreneur. Then the entire room rose. They stood like trees in a forest shifting with the wind. But Elara didn't look at the audience. She looked at the front row. Camille had lowered her head. Whether out of shame, anger, or the absence of a comeback, no one could tell. Jillian's hand was pressed to her mouth. Her eyes were glassy, perhaps from regret, or perhaps from the shock of no longer controlling the narrative. Leonard sat frozen. His hands gripped the arms of his chair, as if he were holding on to a world that had already crumbled. Elara bowed, briefly, without performance. Then she stepped off the stage. No one escorted her. She didn't wait to be called. Outside, the Lakeside night was cool and quiet. October air carried the scent of earth. It carried the whisper of early frost. She drew in a deep breath. No tears. No lump in her throat. Soren was waiting on the stone steps. He held her coat. "You all right?" he asked. He didn't need the answer. Elara nodded. Softly. "Truly, I am." She smiled. "We still have that early train. Right?" Soren grinned. "First class. No looking back." And as they walked into the night, leaving behind the town that once denied her, Elara carried no glory, no bitterness, only herself, whole, and a forest that kept growing. In the very place they once believed nothing ever would.